Hi, I'm Mo. I waited to do the mid-year book freakout tag to have 6 full months, half of the year, mid-year, of reading under my belt to answer these questions. Now that it is July, I am going to do the mid-year book freakout tag. One thing that I'm not sure on, and I feel like has been happening for a couple of years about this tag, is the freakout title. I understand that the idea is that it's mid-year and you're freaking out about the amount of books you read or what you haven't read yet or what you want to read. I get the idea behind it, but I have seen quite a few people be unhappy about the name of that tag, and so I think calling it just the mid-year tag is a little bit maybe more appropriate, but everybody knows the mid-year freakout tag is what to look for in your, keywords or must-watch list or whatever. So in a way, like, you have to put mid-year freakout, but I don't want to put mid-year freakout. I think also with the prevalence of the quarter year tag and the end of year tag, that then you really could just call it the mid-year tag and nobody would be freaking out and it would be a nicer, more inclusive, less nerve-wracking title. I don't know. Now, these are just some of my thoughts. Some of my other thoughts, and something that I've been asking creators about, is how they feel as genre readers, if they feel like they're represented by this tag, or how they feel if they are literary fiction readers and if they feel represented by this tag. And what I've kind of come up with is that no one feels entirely seen by this tag, and that maybe it's time to put some new questions to it and to add some questions in that aren't in there, or to omit some questions that people find to be either too literary or too genre. So what I've done is I've taken a few people's extra questions for this tag. Books and Lala put a couple of extra ones in there, and then I also put some of my own extra questions in, and I'm going to be doing a revised mid-year tag. One of the questions that I didn't include is, as well as best book of the year, what is a book that you keep thinking about, or that made you think the most, or you can't stop coming up with theories and ideas about. And I didn't include that in this version of the tag because I actually want to make a whole other video about that, and Freshly Read Books is a big inspiration for that because she did the mid-year freakout tag. She's much more of a literary fiction girl. She had some really interesting ideas for questions that could be added, and that was one of them. And I had already been thinking about doing a video that was more about books I can't stop thinking about than favorite books of the year so far. I think that's a more interesting look, like, rather than just the books that I liked the best, the books that I am ruminating over still, or that have made me think the most. So look forward to a video on that coming soon. As they say in the biz, without further ado, here is the mid-year book tag. Question number 1 is your best book of the year. And so again, I take a little bit of umbrage with this question because it's not the best book of the year, it's my best book of the year. So what I think is a better way to phrase this question is favorite book of the year so far. Man, I have a couple. I think my favorite book of the year so far is probably going to go to The Only Good Indians, but with honorable mention to The Chrysalids by John Wyndham and We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson. The Only Good Indians is a contemporary horror about American Indigenous people escaping and then returning to their reservation to rehash an old score that needs to be settled. We Have Always Lived in the Castle is about 2 young girls who are ostracized from their town after their family was killed in an unexpected way, and how they deal with the scrutiny and prejudice from the townsfolk. Also kind of a horror. And The Chrysalids by John Wyndham is about a group of young people with special abilities living in a post-apocalyptic future where anyone with special abilities or mutations are not only ostracized, but also often killed. Question number 2 is best sequel you have read so far this year. Again, favorite sequel, I think, really is what we should be saying here. And I am going to choose a book that is not a sequel, that is actually the first in a series. I have read some sequels lately, but none of them were my favorite, but I did want to mention Still Life by Louise Penny. This is the first in a series, not a sequel, but I think it still kind of goes with the essence of this question, and I definitely want to be reading the sequels to this. This is about an older Canadian detective who is worried about his standing in the police force when he goes to a small town to investigate the murder of an older woman who lives on her own with her dog. I really like this book, and I can't wait to find its sequels and read more. A new question to add to this tag would be favorite nonfiction that you've read so far this year. My favorite nonfiction that I read so far this year, An African in Greenland by Tete Michael Kombasi. This is about an African man from Togo who dreams of living in Greenland, and after many years of travel and toil, he makes that dream come true. This was just really interesting. It was written in the 60s, and it was just a really interesting look at African Togoan life, but also at Greenlandian life and the treatment of indigenous Greenland people and the way that Greenland was kind of taken over and colonized, as well as the idea of someone who is totally different looking and totally foreign, and how he is embraced by indigenous people who have also suffered prejudice and racism from the incurring populations. Books and Lala added the question favorite reread of the year, and I think for that one I am going to go with Anne Rice's Interview with a Vampire. I've read this many times when I was a young adult, and this is the first time that I've read it probably in 10 to 15 years, and I really enjoyed my time with it. It held up amazingly well. It follows Louis as he gets turned into a vampire and his thoughts on vampirism and his thoughts on humanity and his longing for community and connection. Another question that Books and Lala added in here was your most read genre, or a new genre that you've been reading lots of so far this year. And I would say not my most read genre, but a genre that I've been reading a lot of is horror, and that is one that I don't read very often normally, or haven't in the past. And another one is romance. Now, reading romance was one of my goals for this year, so I am achieving that goal. I'm happy with both those genres, and I'm happy that they're both in the mix. I would say my most read genre normally is mystery, crime. I have not been reading too many of those, and I can't wait to get back to them actually, because I love mysteries and I miss reading them. The next question is, what is a new release from the first half of the year that you were super excited for but haven't gotten to yet? And I have a couple of answers for this as well. I think Book Lovers is one that has come out that I would really like to read. I do have a lead on this from a free audio site, so hopefully I will be reading this before the end of the summer. Last summer I read Beach Read and was pleasantly surprised. It was one of the first romances I've ever read, and I really enjoyed that. So I'm looking forward to Book Lovers. And then my most anticipated book that I really want to read that I didn't find out about until 2022 is Sundial by Catriona Ward. This book is about a mother and daughter and their tense relationship and returning to the place where the mother grew up in kind of a hopes for reconciliation. Maybe. But it sounds really interesting. I've never read any Catriona Ward, but this book, I'm really drawn to it, and I would really like to find it and be able to read it, or maybe find it on audio and read it that way. And then the next question is most anticipated new release for the second half of the year, and I think the only one that really comes to mind that I know about that I would really like to read comes out on July 19th, and that is The Daughter of Dr. Moreau. This is a Dr. Moreau sequel / retelling by Silvia Moreno Garcia. I've never read any of her work, but this one is the one that super appeals to me. I've never been interested in Mexican Gothic or some of her other work, but a retelling of Dr. Moreau, which is one of my all-time favorite sci-fi horror books, is definitely right up my alley. The next prompt is your biggest disappointment of the year, and I think that's going to go to the Dream Quest of Vellet, Beau. I picked this one up in a little free library at the end of 2021, and I was just intrigued by the idea of it. It's about a dream world, a world parallel but very different from our own, where women are oppressed and silenced, but there is a women's college, and if you can get a slot in this very prestigious college, you might have a better future. But when one of the students goes missing, Vellet Beau, her teacher, goes on a quest to find her. This book is based on another story by H.P. Lovecraft that I didn't read, and I do think, and some people have let me know, Criminale, for instance, that I probably would have gotten more out of this book if I knew that story as well. But I just thought there was a lot of cultural appropriation in this book, and I thought that although the descriptions of the reality were interesting, there was no, depth. It was very scratch the surface, there's more surface. And I think it had a lot of potential, and that's why it's disappointing. I certainly didn't hate this book, but it probably is one of my lowest regarded books of the year. The next question is biggest surprise. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. I had never read this book, and I read it in January for TBR Tackle. It was my very first TBR Tackle book before I changed my whole TBR Tackle list to being BIPOC authors. You just know so much about Frankenstein. You have so much cultural osmosis on this book that you think that you know the story, but I was really surprised by this story, the way that it was told and the way it went down and the themes that were used in it, what subtext was, and it just was not at all what I was expecting. If you don't know what Frankenstein is about, it is about a young man who deeply loves his family and his adopted sister, but is given the opportunity to study science and becomes quite obsessed with science and the idea of dominion over death. He creates a creature who then he has to destroy. The next question is a favorite new author that's either new to you or debut. Definitely has to go to Stephen Graham Jones. I've only read 2 books, 1 short story and 1 full-length novel by Stephen Graham Jones, but I just really, really loved his writing style, and I can't wait to read more from this author, and I think that I am going to enjoy pretty much all of his books, so I'm looking forward to that. As far as debut author, I'm going to talk a little bit about Kelly McClure. Now, this book, Something Is Always Happening Somewhere, is her debut, and I am lucky enough to know her online, and I was happy to pre-order this book, and I really, really enjoyed my experience with it, although this book is not enjoyable in any way story-wise, because it is very dark, very bleak, very depressing, has lots of violence, rape, murder, animal violence. It definitely has stuck with me quite a bit, but in a nightmare kind of way. But that being said, for this extremely short debut novella, I can't stop thinking about this book, and I think about it very, very often, and I cannot wait to see what Kelly McClure does next. Her novels, I think, are going to only become more interesting and more confident. The next question is newest fictional crush. Now, this is a question that maybe should get omitted from this, because I think a lot of genre readers who like sci-fi and fantasy, and I think also people who read a lot of romance like this question, but people who read literary fiction usually tend to not like this question. That's not true for everyone. Bookish, who is much more of a literary fiction reader, likes this question. I just don't get fictional crushes. I'm not saying that if you do get fictional crushes, it's a bad thing. I've been thinking about it a lot, especially since Bookish's comments on it. I just don't think of characters outside of their story, and so therefore I can't crush on them because they are not a fully realized and developed person in my mind. Now, maybe that has something to do with my lizard brain or my logic brain. The books and the characters that are in books exist in those books and in that finite amount of time and space which I am devoting to those books, and I don't think of them in a way that I could ever crush on them. Again, maybe that's too logical, but I feel like the next question goes right along with that, which is newest favorite character. I don't really get favorite characters. I can come up with an answer to that question because I can think about, oh, what characters stick in my mind. I think the way you think about this question is like, who would I want to hang out with? And like, I don't want to hang out with any of these people because they're all only exist in the books that they exist. Maybe that's very a small, narrow look at things. But if I had to pick a new favorite character for 2022, I would say that it was Janie from Their Eyes Were Watching God. I just thought she was a really interesting person, very complex, and very different from many of the Black women that I've read from in the early 20th century. This book was written in the 30s and takes place in the 30s, and her depiction is just very, very different from other books set in and around these times and locations and constraints of America. A lot of her decisions are made for her, but she sits in them almost as if she decided them for herself. And I think that that is an interesting place for her to be. She never feels victimized by those things, and she's not portrayed as victimized by those things. When she knows it's time to move on from those situations, she does move on from those situations, and she takes her life into her own hands and her future and her destiny, and she doesn't let other people decide what she's going to do. So I really liked her as a character. I thought she was extremely strong. Now, again, I wouldn't be friends with her because she exists only in a book, but I enjoyed reading her and being with her for the time of this book. The next question is a book that made you cry. There's been quite a few books that made me cry. I do keep a list. The first book that I have on my list, and I think the one that comes to mind the most, is The Thursday Murder Club by Richard Osman. I read it on audio, and that probably helped in it being quite emotional, but I really liked this book. I thought it was uplifting and fun and sad and depressing. It's about a collection of octogenarians living in an old folks' home solving crimes. The next question is a book that made you happy, and I am going to go with Franny, the Queen of Provincetown, which I have read twice now, once last year and once this year. This was a great reread as well. It is a book that consistently and constantly makes me happy, and one that I see rereading maybe every year. It's about gay identity and queer joy and community and encouraging others to be their authentic selves, and I highly recommend it for anyone. The next prompt is most beautiful book you've bought or received. I'm only going to go with books that I've read this year because I have way too many books that I've gotten this year to choose from all of my TBR shelf. Dementia by Russell Coy is such a beautiful cover. I just really love this one. I found it in a little free library. Unfortunately, it's probably one of my most hated books of the year, but I love the cover. It's so beautiful. It's like almost worth keeping just because of this cover. I also want to say all of my NYRB books that I have read this year. I just love their cover design, and I love that they're so recognizable. I love that they have very simple but distinct spines, and they're just all really, really pretty books. Favorite video that you've done this year. I don't have like a video that stands out in my mind that's like really, really my favorite video. I've done a couple of sort of kind of discussion videos this year, which I've really enjoyed. One that went well was All Books Count. That was a fun one to do. It was a little bit impromptu, but it got a lot of great response and a lot of great comments by people, so it did create a discussion. I think any book that I do about sustainability is good in my mind because I don't do enough of those, so I feel happy when I have one on my channel. I would say that the day in my life videos that I've done have been fun to do, and I've really enjoyed doing those and trying to make them different because I basically do the same thing every day. So it's fun to come up with new ideas for that. The next prompt would be favorite community member, but I don't particularly want to do a favorite community member, so I have thought about it, and I think what I would rather do is favorite video concept that's been going around or favorite tag that's been going around. So I think for tag, I really, really enjoyed the quarter year crisis tag, the quarter year tag. Again, maybe not the best name, quarter year crisis. I think we could just do quarter year, mid-year, end of year and be happy with that. I really liked Criminali's BookTube birth year tag. I think that was a really fun project, a fun tag, and then a fun project that you could continue on with. And then of course for videos, my favorite video / BookTube game of the year has to go to TBR Tackle. Yes, I love the BookTube spin by Rick McDonnell, but TBR Tackle by Katie Books has been the most fun thing to do this year by far. The last question is, what books do you have to read by the end of the year? And can I just turn you around and show you my huge TBR shelf? Sure. A real answer to this question is my BookTube spin books, especially the 2 books that I haven't read. One that was on my BookTube spin from last year and one that was on my BookTube spin from this year. All the TBR Tackle books for the rest of the year. Other than that, I really do want to read some more books by Indigenous American authors or Indigenous Canadian authors. I have a couple on my list. I'm still looking for more recommendations of what to read. Also more nonfiction. I know that Nonfiction November is pretty much right around the corner and I will hopefully be reading a ton of nonfiction that month, but I feel like I've been slacking a little on my nonfiction and I miss it. I love to read nonfiction. So that was the mid-year book tag. Let me know any comments or questions about any of the answers that I put below. Let me know if you've read any of the books that I've mentioned here. Let me know what you think of the new questions and if you think that they should be included or you should make up your own questions or etc, etc. And I hope you're having a great first 6 months of the year and I will see you in the next one. Bye!